The gunshot echoed through Bannack, Montana like a crack of thunder, but Priscilla Montgomery barely flinched as she stepped off the stagecoach, dust swirling around her burgundy travel dress. She'd come too far to be deterred by the lawlessness of this gold-rush town, nearly 2,000 miles from Boston, to claim her late uncle's property, and not a soul to welcome her. It was April of 1863, and Bannack was barely a year into its boom. Wooden buildings lined the main street, most still sporting raw lumber that hadn't yet weathered to gray. Men outnumbered women 20-1, a fact made evident by the way conversation halted as Priscilla descended from the coach, her honey-blonde hair tucked neatly beneath her bonnet. "Madam, where would you like your trunk?" asked the driver, a weathered man with tobacco-stained teeth. "The Montana Hotel, if you please," Priscilla replied, keeping her voice steady despite her exhaustion. 30 days of travel had left her body aching and her spirit nearly broken, but she'd sooner die than show weakness in this town of wolves. She'd inherited her uncle's claim after his passing, a small parcel of land, with a creek running through it that supposedly contained enough gold to build a life upon. Uncle Frederick had written of its potential in his letters, describing Montana territory as a place where a person could reinvent themselves. For Priscilla, 23 and facing spinsterhood after her fiancé abandoned her for a wealthier prospect, reinvention sounded like salvation. The hotel proved to be little more than a 2-story wooden structure with peeling paint and creaking floors, but it offered privacy and a door that locked, luxuries Priscilla had missed during her journey west. After washing away the worst of the travel grime and changing into a fresh dress, one of only 3 she'd brought with her, she ventured downstairs to inquire about her uncle's property. The hotel proprietor, a round woman named Mrs. Hastings with shrewd eyes that missed nothing, looked Priscilla up and down with undisguised curiosity. "Frederick Montgomery's niece, you say? Well, his claim is about 4 miles outside town up Grasshopper Creek. You'll need a guide to take you. Can you recommend someone trustworthy?" Priscilla asked. Mrs. Hastings pursed her lips. Most men here would sooner dig for gold than play escort, but she paused, looking toward the door as it swung open. "Xavier O'Malley just might be your best option." The man who entered seemed to bring the wilderness with him, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a beard that couldn't quite hide the strong line of his jaw. He wore a faded blue shirt beneath a leather vest, and dusty trousers tucked into well-worn boots. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster worn to the shape of the revolver it held. "O'Malley," Mrs. Hastings called. "Got a lady here needs to get to Fred Montgomery's old claim." Xavier O'Malley turned, and Priscilla found herself fixed by eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue that seemed to change with the light. He studied her with an intensity that made her straighten her spine. "Frederick Montgomery was my uncle," Priscilla explained, extending her hand as if they were meeting in a Boston parlor rather than a frontier hotel lobby. "I've inherited his claim and need someone familiar with the area to guide me there." O'Malley hesitated before taking her hand, his calloused palm dwarfing hers. "Miss Montgomery, that claim's been abandoned for months. Nothing there but a half-collapsed cabin and ground that's been worked over. Nevertheless, it's mine now, and I intend to see it," Priscilla replied firmly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Most ladies coming to Bannack are either married or looking to be. You planning to work that claim yourself?" "My plans are my own concern, Mr. O'Malley. I simply require transportation and guidance." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. $2 and we leave at first light. The trail gets rough and you'll need sturdier boots than those." He gestured to her leather half-boots, more suitable for city streets than mountain trails. Priscilla bristled at his presumption but knew he was right. "I'll be ready at dawn." With appropriate footwear. The following morning, Priscilla waited outside the hotel, wearing her most practical dress and a pair of men's boots she'd purchased from the general store. They were too large even with 2 pairs of stockings, but they would serve better than her own shoes. She'd braided her hair tightly and tied it with a ribbon, then topped it with her bonnet for protection from the sun. Xavier arrived leading 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding and a smaller, gentle-looking mare. "Ever ridden astride, Miss Montgomery?" he asked without preamble. "I have not," she admitted, eyeing the saddle with apprehension. "In Boston, ladies rode side saddle or in carriages, but I'm a quick study." "You'll need to be," he replied, offering his cupped hands to help her mount. The mare was patient as Priscilla arranged her skirts as modestly as possible, though she knew her ankles and, indeed, a good portion of her calves were visible. Xavier gave brief instructions on handling the reins and using her knees to guide the horse, then mounted his own with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. They rode out of Bannack as the town was just coming to life, heading northeast along Grasshopper Creek. The spring morning was cool, but the sun promised warmth as it climbed higher. Priscilla found herself stealing glances at her guide, noting how he seemed part of the landscape, as natural in this wild country as the pines that dotted the hillsides. "How long have you been in Bannack, Mr. O'Malley?" she asked after they'd ridden in silence for nearly an hour. "Since '62, when they first struck gold," he replied without looking back. "Before that, California. Before that, Colorado. You follow the gold rushes." Now he did turn, one eyebrow raised. "Most everyone here does. Yet Mrs. Hastings said you might be willing to act as my guide rather than pan for gold yourself." He shrugged. "Gold's getting harder to find. Man needs to diversify his interests." "And what are your interests, Mr. O'Malley?" "Staying alive," he said simply, "and putting enough away to buy some land that won't play out when the gold's gone." They rode on, the trail gradually narrowing as they followed the creek upstream. The terrain grew more rugged, with rocky outcroppings and steeper inclines. Xavier pointed out landmarks and signs of wildlife tracks left by deer and elk, the distant silhouette of an eagle riding thermals above the ridge. By midday, Priscilla's thighs and back ached from the unaccustomed posture, but she refused to complain. They stopped in a small clearing to rest the horses and eat the simple lunch Mrs. Hastings had packed: bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. "Your uncle was one of the first to stake a claim in this area," Xavier said as they ate. "Smart man, but unlucky. Got fever last winter." By the time anyone found him, it was too late. Priscilla felt a pang of regret. She'd only met Uncle Frederick a few times as a child, but his letters had been her window to a world beyond Boston's rigid society. He wrote that the creek on his property was rich with gold. Xavier's expression grew guarded. "Every prospector thinks his claim is the one that'll make him rich. You don't believe it contained gold." "I believe your uncle worked that claim hard and didn't find enough to make the journey back east. That should tell you something." Priscilla squared her shoulders. Perhaps he simply needed a fresh perspective. Xavier's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "City girl's perspective at that. I'm more capable than I appear, Mr. O'Malley. You'd have to be to travel alone across the country." He stood, dusting off his hands. "We should keep moving. Still got a ways to go, and I'd like to get you back to town before dark." They continued their journey, the trail becoming increasingly challenging. Priscilla's mare picked her way carefully over rocky ground, following Xavier's gelding with steady determination. As they rounded a bend, Xavier suddenly reined in, holding up a hand for Priscilla to stop. "What is it?" she whispered, alarmed by his tense posture. "Riders. 3 of them heading this way." He scanned the surrounding terrain, then pointed to a narrow gap between boulders. "That way. Quick." Without question, Priscilla guided her horse after his, following him into a small canyon that cut away from the main trail. The walls rose steeply on either side, offering concealment but also trapping them if they needed to flee. "Who are we hiding from?" Priscilla asked, keeping her voice low. Xavier's expression was grim. "Road agents, most likely. Plumber's gang. They've been hitting travelers between Virginia City and Bannack, taking gold shipments, robbing stage coaches. But we have nothing of value. They might not wait to find that out." He dismounted and helped her down. "We'll wait here until they pass." The narrow canyon offered little room for movement. They stood close together, holding the horses' reins and listening for the sound of passing riders. Priscilla became acutely aware of Xavier's proximity, the subtle scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to his clothes, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Minutes stretched into an hour as they waited, speaking only in whispers. Xavier explained that Henry Plummer, Bannack's sheriff, was suspected by many to be the very leader of the road agents terrorizing the area, though no one had been able to prove it. "How can a man sworn to uphold the law be its worst offender?" Priscilla asked, horrified by the notion. "Power corrupts," Xavier replied simply. "And out here, there's no one to answer to but yourself and God. Some men forget the latter entirely." When he finally deemed it safe to continue, the afternoon was waning. They mounted again and returned to the main trail, pushing the horses to make up for lost time. Xavier led them up an increasingly steep path that wound through pine forest and across rocky terrain until they crested a ridge. "There," he said, pointing down into a small valley where a cabin stood beside a creek. "That's your uncle's claim." The sight struck Priscilla with unexpected emotion. This humble place was what Uncle Frederick had given up his comfortable Boston life for what he'd written about with such passion and hope. And now it was hers. They descended to the cabin, which proved to be in better condition than Xavier had implied. Though small and crude by Eastern standards, its log walls were sound, its stone chimney intact. The door hung slightly askew on leather hinges, and the single window was covered with oiled paper rather than glass, but it offered shelter. Inside, dust covered everything. A narrow bed frame stood against one wall, its mattress of canvas and straw molded from winter damp. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a small cast-iron stove comprised the remaining furniture. On a shelf above the bed sat a few books, a tarnished pocket watch, and a daguerreotype in a simple frame, a younger Frederick Montgomery standing proudly in front of this very cabin. "He lived here alone?" Priscilla asked, running her fingers over the photograph. "Like most prospectors," Xavier confirmed, watching her from the doorway. "Men come west chasing dreams, leaving everything behind, including families, some. Others never had much to leave." He stepped inside, his large frame making the cabin seem even smaller. "We should check the creek before we lose the light. I'll show you how your uncle would have worked his claim." Outside, the creek burbled over rocks and gravel, its clear waters catching the late afternoon sun. Xavier pointed out signs of previous work, piles of sorted rock, the remains of a sluice box, areas where the bank had been dug away in search of gold-bearing gravel. He demonstrated the basics of panning, scooping creek bed material into a flat metal pan and swirling water to wash away lighter sediment, leaving any heavier gold behind. To Priscilla's delight, tiny flecks of gold appeared among the black sand in the bottom of the pan, not much, but undeniably present. "There is gold here," she said triumphantly. Xavier nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. Not enough to make a living, especially for someone without experience. This creek's been picked over. Whatever easy gold was here, your uncle probably found it. Then I'll find what he missed, Priscilla insisted, or find another way to make this land profitable. As the sun began to sink behind the western ridges, Xavier insisted they start back toward town. We don't want to be on these trails after dark, he warned. And I promise to get you back safely. Reluctantly, Priscilla agreed, taking one last look at the cabin that represented her new beginning. They mounted up and began the return journey, but Xavier chose a different route, explaining it would be faster though slightly rougher terrain. The rougher terrain proved to be a narrow path that skirted the edge of a deep canyon, with a sheer drop to their right and steep, thorny slopes to their left. Priscilla's mare followed Xavier's gelding carefully, but as they rounded a particularly tight bend, a rattlesnake slithered across the path. The mare reared in fright, nearly sending Priscilla over the edge. She clung desperately to the saddle as the horse backed up, its hooves slipping on loose gravel. Xavier dismounted in an instant, grabbing the mare's bridle and speaking in low, soothing tones until the animal calmed. But the damage was done in her panic. The horse had backed into a thicket of wild roses and desert thorns that covered the canyon's upper slope. "Are you hurt?" Xavier asked, helping Priscilla dismount. "I don't think so, just shaken," she replied, though her heart still pounded. It wasn't until she tried to move that she realized her dress had caught in the thorns. When she pulled away, the fabric tore with a sickening rip, leaving a large portion of her skirt hanging in tatters. Horrified, Priscilla tried to gather the torn fabric, but the damage was extensive. The back of her dress from waist to hem was shredded, exposing her petticoat and, in some places, the skin of her legs. Her face burned with mortification. Without a word, Xavier shrugged out of his long canvas duster coat and held it out to her, his gaze deliberately averted. "Wrap this around you," he said gruffly. "It'll get you back to town with your dignity intact." Priscilla took the coat with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, touched by his consideration. She wrapped the coat around her waist, tying the sleeves to secure it like an impromptu skirt over her torn dress. "We'll walk the horses from here," Xavier said, still not looking at her. "It's safer anyway." They continued in silence, leading the horses along the narrow path until it widened enough to remount. Even then, Xavier rode slightly ahead, giving Priscilla space and privacy. The coat was heavy and smelled of him tobacco, leather, and the indefinable scent of open spaces, but it covered her completely. Dusk was falling as they approached Bannack, the town's windows beginning to glow with lamplight. Xavier escorted Priscilla directly to the hotel, dismounting to help her down before anyone could see her predicament. "Thank you for today, Mr. O'Malley," she said as they stood outside the hotel's entrance. "Despite the mishap, I'm grateful for your guidance." He nodded, finally meeting her eyes. "What will you do now about the claim?" "I intend to make it work," Priscilla replied with more confidence than she felt. Somehow, a shadow of concern crossed his face. "It's no place for a woman alone. I have few alternatives, Mr. O'Malley. And I'm not afraid of hard work." He studied her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "My cabin's about a mile south of your uncle's. If you need anything, supplies, help with repairs, whatever, you can find me there." He handed her the rough map he'd sketched. Surprised by the offer, Priscilla took the paper. "That's very kind." "It's not kindness, it's common sense. Neighbors look out for each other out here. It's how we survive." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Montgomery." "Your coat," she began, but he waved her off. "Keep it." Return it when you have a chance to repair your dress." With that, he turned and led both horses toward the livery stable, leaving Priscilla to ponder the complex man who'd been her guide. Over the next few days, Priscilla made preparations to move to her uncle's claim. She purchased supplies, food staples, tools, bedding, and 2 changes of sturdy clothing better suited to frontier life than her Boston dresses. She also acquired a mule to carry her belongings and hired a young boy from the livery to help her reach the cabin. Mrs. Hastings tried repeatedly to dissuade her. "A woman alone up in those hills. It's not proper, not to mention dangerous. In Juns, wild animals claim jumpers, any one of those could be the death of you." "I appreciate your concern," Priscilla replied as she packed her few belongings, "but I've come too far to turn back now. This may be my only chance to build something that's truly mine." The older woman sighed. "At least wait until you can find a husband to help you work that claim. There's no shortage of men in Bannack looking for wives." "I didn't travel 2,000 miles to become some miner's housekeeper," Priscilla said firmly. "If I marry again, it will be on my terms, not out of desperation." Again, Mrs. Hastings raised an eyebrow. Priscilla hesitated, then decided truth was simpler than fabrication. "I was engaged. He found someone with a larger dowry." "Men," Mrs. Hastings snorted. "Well, if you're determined to do this foolishness, at least take my shotgun. It's not much, but it might scare off trouble." Touched by the unexpected kindness, Priscilla accepted the weapon and a brief lesson in its use. The following morning, she set out for her uncle's claim, the boy from the livery leading her mule laden with supplies. They reached the cabin by midday, and after helping her unload, the boy departed with his payment, leaving Priscilla truly alone for the first time in her life. The silence was profound. No rumble of carriages, no neighbors' voices, no church bells marking the hours. Just the whisper of pine branches in the breeze and the constant murmur of the creek. Priscilla stood in the cabin doorway, simultaneously terrified and exhilarated by her newfound independence. Her first task was making the cabin habitable. She swept out months of dust and debris, scrubbed the single table and chairs, and aired the mattress in the sun before stuffing it with fresh grasses. She washed the oiled paper window covering and rehung the door properly on its hinges. By sunset, she had created a space that, while humble, felt clean and orderly. The next day, Priscilla explored her property more thoroughly. The claim encompassed about 20 acres, mostly wooded hillside with the creek running through its center. The previous fall's mining efforts were evident in the disturbed creek banks and piles of sorted stone. Using the basic techniques Xavier had demonstrated, she spent several hours panning, finding only a few small flecks of gold for her efforts. After 3 days of similar results, Priscilla had to admit that Xavier's assessment was correct. Whatever easily accessible gold had been here, her uncle had already found it. She would need to find another way to make the land productive. On her 4th evening, as Priscilla sat outside watching the sunset and contemplating her options, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her reach for Mrs. Hastings' shotgun. She relaxed when she recognized Xavier O'Malley's tall figure on horseback. "Evening, Miss Montgomery," he called, reining in his gelding at a respectful distance. "Thought I'd check how you're settling in." "Mr. O'Malley," she acknowledged, setting aside the shotgun. "I'm managing quite well, thank you." He dismounted, looking around at her improvements to the cabin's exterior, the swept yard, the stacked firewood, the small garden plot she'd begun to prepare. "Seems so. Found much gold?" "Enough to know there's not enough," she admitted. "But I'm considering other possibilities." Xavier raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "This land has good water, timber, grazing potential. With some investment, it could support a small herd of cattle or perhaps a market garden. Miners need food as much as they need gold. He studied her with new interest. Most people come to mining country thinking only of what's under the ground, not what could grow on top of it. I'm not most people, Mr. O'Malley. No, you're not, he agreed quietly. From his saddlebag, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. Brought you something from town. Thought you might need it out here. Surprised, Priscilla accepted the package and unwrapped it to find a hunting knife in a leather sheath. The blade was about 6 inches long, the handle made of polished antler. It was my spare, Xavier explained quickly. Useful for everything from skinning game to cutting rope. Every settler needs a good knife. Thank you, Priscilla said, genuinely touched by the practical gift. I do appreciate your thoughtfulness. An awkward silence fell between them, broken when Xavier cleared his throat. I should be going. Just wanted to make sure you weren't regretting your decision. Not yet, Priscilla smiled. Though ask me again after my first Montana winter. He almost smiled back. I'll check on you again in a few days if that's all right. Bring any supplies you might need from town. I'd appreciate that, and... She hesitated, then continued, I've repaired my dress. Your coat is inside. Let me get it for you. When she returned with the folded duster, their fingers brushed as he took it from her. For a moment neither moved, caught in some invisible current between them. Then Xavier stepped back, draping the coat over his saddle. Good night, Miss Montgomery. Good night, Mr. O'Malley. She watched him ride away, the strange feeling of connection lingering long after he disappeared into the gathering darkness. True to his word, Xavier returned 3 days later, bringing salt, coffee, and news from Bannack. He declined Priscilla's invitation to stay for dinner, but helped her repair a leak in the cabin roof before departing. His visits became a regular occurrence. Every few days he would appear, sometimes bringing small necessities from town, other times simply checking that she was safe. Priscilla found herself looking forward to these brief encounters. Xavier was a man of few words, but she gradually learned pieces of his story. Born in New York to Irish immigrants, he'd left home at 16 after his parents died of typhoid. He'd worked his way west, trying his luck in various gold rushes before landing in Bannack. Unlike many prospectors, he'd saved enough to purchase a small cabin and parcel of land where he trapped in winter and worked odd jobs when not mining his modest claim. You're not like other miners, she observed one evening as they sat outside her cabin drinking coffee. You seem to think beyond the next big strike, he shrugged. Seen too many men waste their lives chasing something that's not there. Gold fever's a disease of its own kind. Is that why you've been helping me? You think I'm afflicted? No, he said after a moment. I think you're someone trying to build something lasting. That's rare out here. As May turned to June, Priscilla's garden began to flourish. She'd planted potatoes, beans, carrots, and other hardy vegetables, using seeds she'd purchased in Bannack and techniques remembered from her aunt's kitchen garden in Boston. With Xavier's occasional help, she constructed a crude fence to keep deer away from her crops. She also began experimenting with baking, using the cabin's small stove to produce loaves of bread that she sold in Bannack on her weekly trips for supplies. The miners, starved for anything homemade, paid well for her bread and eagerly requested pies and cakes. On one such trip to town, Priscilla encountered Henry Plummer, Bannack's sheriff, for the first time. He was a handsome man with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes, and he took an immediate interest in the Lady Baker, as he called her. Miss Montgomery, he said, tipping his hat as she left the general store with her supplies. I've heard about your enterprise up at Old Fred's claim. Quite impressive for a woman alone. Thank you, Sheriff, she replied politely, though something in his manner made her uneasy. If you ever need protection or assistance, he continued, falling into step beside her, my office is always open to you. You're very kind, but I manage quite well, so I've heard, though some folks wonder about your frequent visitor. His smile took on a knowing edge. That Irish drifter, O'Malley. People talk, you know. Heat rushed to Priscilla's face, partly embarrassment, partly anger at the insinuation. Mr. O'Malley is my neighbor and has been nothing but respectful. I won't dignify gossip by addressing it. Plummer held up his hands in mock surrender. No offense meant, Miss Montgomery, just looking out for the welfare of Bannack's citizens. His eyes hardened slightly. All of them. As she walked away, Priscilla couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just been threatened, though Plummer's words had been perfectly civil. That evening, when Xavier made his customary visit, she mentioned the encounter. His reaction was immediate and alarming. "Stay away from Plummer," he said, his voice low and intense. "Whatever he offers, whatever he says, keep your distance. You believe the rumors that he's behind the road agent robberies." Xavier glanced around as if the very trees might be listening. "I don't just believe it, I know it. But no one can prove anything, and those who have tried have disappeared. Why would a lawman turn outlaw? Power. Greed." Xavier stared into the fire. "Plummer came here with a reputation, already killed a man in Idaho, they say. But he's charming, good with words. Got himself elected sheriff, and now he knows every gold shipment, every valuable coming in or out of the territory. And you think he's noticed me because you're new. Different. Successfully working land that many thought worthless." Xavier met her eyes, "And because he may have noticed me visiting." Priscilla felt her cheeks warm again. "Mr. O'Malley, I assure you, I know there's nothing improper," he interrupted, "but Plummer might see me as competition. Or someone with something to lose." He stood abruptly. "Maybe I should stop coming so often." "No," Priscilla said more forcefully than she intended. Then, more composedly, "I won't be intimidated, and I value your friendship. Please don't let gossip dictate your actions." Xavier studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "As you wish. But be careful in town, and keep that shotgun loaded." As summer progressed, Priscilla's garden flourished, and her baking business grew to include regular deliveries to the hotel and several mining camps. The physical labor of maintaining her property transformed her. Her hands grew calloused. Her skin tanned despite her bonnet, and muscles developed in her arms and back from carrying water and chopping wood. Xavier continued his visits, though he was more careful about being seen. He often arrived at dusk and left before full dark, or came under the pretext of trading for her vegetables and bread. Despite this caution, their relationship deepened. He taught her to fish in the creek, to identify edible plants in the forest, to spot signs of approaching weather changes. In return, she shared stories of Boston, read to him from her few books, and taught him to appreciate her experimental recipes. One evening in late July, as they sat by the creek watching the sunset turn the water to liquid gold, Xavier asked the question that had clearly been on his mind for months. "Why did you really come here, Priscilla? All the way from Boston, alone, to a place you'd never seen?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it made her pause before answering. "I told you about my broken engagement," she began. "What I didn't say was how relieved I felt when Charles jilted me. I should have been devastated, but instead, I felt free." She traced patterns in the sandy creek bank. "I realized I'd been living the life others expected, the proper Boston lady, destined for a proper Boston marriage, confined to a proper Boston house." She looked up at the vast Montana sky, painted in shades of pink and purple as the sun descended. "When Uncle Frederick's letter came, offering me his claim, it felt like permission to want something different, to be someone different. Xavier nodded slowly. And have you found it, that different life? Priscilla smiled. I've found parts of it. I've found that I'm stronger than I knew. That I can build something with my own hands. That silence can be peaceful rather than lonely. She hesitated, then added softly, and I've found friendship where I least expected it. The look Xavier gave her then was so intense that Priscilla had to glance away, her heart suddenly racing. When she dared look back, he had composed his features into their usual reserved expression. It's getting dark, he said, standing and offering her his hand. I should go. As he helped her to her feet, they stood close, too close for propriety, but neither moved away. For a breathless moment, Priscilla thought he might kiss her, but Xavier stepped back, releasing her hand. Good night, Priscilla. Good night, Xavier. After he left, Priscilla remained by the creek, trying to understand the feelings stirring within her. She'd come west to escape one man's rejection, not to find another man's affection. Yet she couldn't deny that Xavier O'Malley had become important to her in ways that transcended mere neighborly concern. August brought scorching heat that tested Priscilla's resolve. The creek shrank to a trickle, forcing her to carry water from a spring higher up the mountain for her garden. The journey to and from Bannack became grueling under the relentless sun, and the dusty town offered little relief. On one such trip, Priscilla encountered Sheriff Plummer again, this time outside the assay office where she'd gone to sell a small amount of gold she'd managed to pan from the creek. Miss Montgomery, he greeted her, his smile as charming and cold as ever. I hear your little farm is quite the success. It provides what I need, she replied neutrally, trying to move past him. Plummer blocked her path casually. I've been thinking about your situation. A woman alone on a remote claim. It's not just improper, it's dangerous. I manage quite well, Sheriff. So far, he agreed. But winter's coming. Storms, deep snow, wolves, not to mention more human predators. Road agents aren't the only danger in these mountains. Priscilla met his gaze steadily. Are you warning me of something specific, Sheriff? Just offering friendly advice. That claim of yours might be worth more than you realize. There are men who'd pay good money for land with reliable water, especially with your improvements. It's not for sale. Plummer's smile tightened. Everything has a price, Miss Montgomery. Especially in mining country. He tipped his hat and stepped aside. Think about it. Life out here can change in an instant. Shaken by the encounter, Priscilla hurried to complete her errands and leave town. As she rode the mare she'd purchased with her baking earnings, she couldn't shake the feeling that Plummer's words had been a veiled threat. But why would the sheriff be interested in her uncle's played-out claim? The answer came that evening when Xavier arrived for his visit, his expression grim. He dismounted quickly, scanning the surroundings before approaching her cabin. Plummer spoke to you in town today, he said without preamble. Priscilla nodded. How did you know? Word travels. What did he want? She explained the conversation, watching Xavier's face darken as she recounted Plummer's suggestions about selling the claim. There's been talk, Xavier said slowly, about the territorial capital moving from Bannack to Virginia City. If that happens, property between the two towns becomes valuable way stations, supply posts, relay stations for mail. And my land lies directly on that route, Priscilla realized, with water and growing space. Exactly. Plummer's not just a road agent, he's investing in land too, preparing for when the gold runs out. Xavier paced the small cabin. If he wants your claim, he'll find a way to get it. I won't be bullied into selling, Priscilla insisted. Xavier stopped pacing and faced her. This isn't about bullying. Plummer's men have killed for less. People disappear in these mountains all the time, accidents, Indian attacks, exposure. His voice grew urgent. You need to leave, Priscilla. Go back east or at least to Virginia City until— No. She stood her ground, chin raised. I've worked too hard for this place. I won't abandon it at the first sign of trouble. This isn't the first sign, Xavier countered. Plummer doesn't make idle threats. Then what do you suggest? That I give up everything I've built here? Xavier raked a hand through his hair in frustration. I don't know, but staying here alone isn't safe anymore. An idea formed in Priscilla's mind, outrageous by Boston standards, but perhaps not so strange in this frontier world where conventional rules bent to necessity. What if I wasn't alone? She asked quietly. Xavier went still. What are you saying? I'm saying. Priscilla gathered her courage. Two claims together are stronger than one. Two people working together can accomplish more than either alone. Priscilla, I'm not proposing marriage, she clarified quickly. At least not yet, but a partnership. You said yourself you wanted land that wouldn't play out when the gold's gone. My land has water, growing space. Your skills complement mine. Xavier stared at her, his expression unreadable. You can't be serious. I'm perfectly serious. It's a practical solution. Practical. He almost laughed. There's nothing practical about a woman inviting a man to share her property without the benefit of marriage. Your reputation would be ruined. My reputation in Boston is already ruined, Priscilla pointed out. And out here, people already gossip about us. Why not give them something real to talk about? Xavier shook his head. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to consider a business arrangement that benefits us both and keeps this land out of Plummer's hands. A business arrangement. Xavier's voice was flat. Priscilla stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. For now. Though I think we both know there's more between us than mere neighborly concern. For a moment, something raw and vulnerable showed in Xavier's eyes. Then his expression closed and he stepped away. I need to think, he said, moving toward the door. This isn't a decision to make in haste. Of course, Priscilla agreed, though disappointment washed through her. Take what time you need. At the doorway, Xavier paused. Whatever happens, be vigilant. Don't go to town alone. Keep the shotgun close. After he left, Priscilla sat for a long time by her small fire, questioning her own boldness. Had she misread Xavier's feelings? Had she compromised whatever respect he held for her? The uncertainty kept her awake most of the night. 3 days passed with no sign of Xavier. Priscilla tried to focus on her garden and baking, but anxiety gnawed at her. Had she driven away the one person in Montana territory she truly trusted? On the 4th day, unable to bear the suspense any longer, she decided to visit his cabin. The trail Xavier had mapped for her months ago was easy enough to follow. His property lay in a small, sheltered valley about a mile south of hers, with a different branch of the creek running through it. As she approached on her mare, she saw smoke rising from the chimney of a cabin similar to her own, though slightly larger. Before she could reach the cabin, however, the sound of multiple horses approaching from the opposite direction made her rein in and take cover behind a stand of pines. 3 riders appeared, 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize and Sheriff Henry Plummer. They dismounted outside Xavier's cabin. From her hiding place, Priscilla could hear snippets of their conversation as Plummer knocked forcefully on the door. O'Malley, open up. Sheriff's business. Xavier appeared in the doorway, his posture wary. What can I do for you, Sheriff? Information, Plummer replied smoothly. About your neighbor, Miss Montgomery. Word is you two are close. She's a neighbor. I check on her occasionally, as any decent man would. One of Plummer's companions snorted. Real decent of you. Xavier ignored the jibe. What about Miss Montgomery? She's sitting on valuable land, Plummer said. Land that would serve the territory better and more. Capable hands. Seems to me her hands are plenty capable, Xavier replied. She's made that claim profitable in ways old Fred never managed. Plummer's voice hardened. Let me be clear, O'Malley. That woman needs to sell and move on. I have buyers ready. You can help convince her or you can stay out of it. Those are your only options. And if I don't agree with either. The threat in Plummer's laugh was unmistakable. Then you might find yourself facing charges, claim jumping maybe, or assault. Witnesses saw you in that saloon fight last month. A fight your man started, Xavier countered. My word against yours, and I'm the law in Bannack. Plummer stepped closer. Be smart, O'Malley. The Montgomery woman doesn't belong here. Help her see that, and there might be something in it for you too. From her hiding place, Priscilla couldn't see Xavier's expression, but his voice remained steady. I'll think about it. Do that. Plummer mounted his horse. You have 3 days to get back to me. After that, I can't guarantee her safety or yours. The 3 men rode off, leaving Xavier standing in his doorway, fists clenched at his sides. Priscilla waited until they were well out of sight before emerging from her hiding place. Xavier, she called softly, approaching the cabin. He whirled, hand going to his gun, then froze when he saw her. Priscilla, what are you doing here? I came to see you, she admitted. I heard everything. Xavier's face paled. You shouldn't have come. It's not safe. Nowhere is safe now, she countered, dismounting and approaching him. Plummer's made that clear. He ushered her quickly inside and closed the door. The cabin's interior was simply furnished but neat, with a stone fireplace, a bed larger than hers, a table with chairs and shelves holding books and tools. How much did you hear? He asked as she took in her surroundings. Enough to know Plummer won't take no for an answer. She faced him squarely. And enough to know that my proposition makes even more sense now. Together we can defend what's ours. Separately we're vulnerable. Xavier shook his head. You don't understand. Plummer doesn't just want your land, he wants control of everything between Bannack and Virginia City. Men who stand in his way end up dead. Then what's your solution? Run, hide, surrender what we've worked for. He was silent for a long moment, then said, There's talk of forming a vigilance committee. Men who are tired of Plummer's gang terrorizing honest citizens. If enough stand together. How long would that take? And would it stop him from targeting us specifically? She stepped closer. Xavier, my offer still stands, not just as a practical solution, but because. She gathered her courage. Because I care for you, more than I should, perhaps. The conflict in his eyes was painful to witness. Priscilla, I can't let you risk your reputation, your future. It's my risk to take, she interrupted. And I've already chosen. Xavier closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. You deserve better than a rough miner with nothing to his name but a small claim and a bad reputation. I deserve to choose my own path, she corrected gently. And I choose this one, with you, if you'll have me. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Xavier raised one hand to her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin. I've thought of little else since you suggested it, he admitted quietly. Not the partnership, though that makes sense too, but being with you. It's what I've wanted since that day in the canyon when you stood so proudly in my coat, refusing to be embarrassed by circumstances beyond your control. Priscilla smiled at the memory. I felt something that day too, something I wasn't ready to name. And now I think I might call it love, she whispered, given time to grow. Xavier's answering smile transformed his face, erasing the worry lines and revealing the handsome man beneath the frontier hardness. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent. Priscilla had been kissed before, proper, restrained kisses from Charles in her aunt's parlor, but nothing like this. This was a promise, a claiming, a beginning. When Xavier finally pulled back, they were both breathless. I don't have a ring, he said, still holding her close, or a proper house to offer you, but if you'll have me as I am. As long as you'll have me as I am, she replied. Not a proper Boston lady anymore, but a woman who knows her own mind. They agreed to marry as soon as possible, both for propriety's sake and for legal protection of their combined properties. The territorial judge would be in Virginia City the following week, Xavier knew. They could travel there together, be married, and return to face Plummer with their united claim. The next days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Priscilla packed her most valuable possessions and harvested what she could from her garden. Xavier reinforced the doors and windows of both cabins, unsure which they would ultimately choose to occupy. They agreed to stay at his property until after the wedding, as it was farther from the main trail and less likely to be watched by Plummer's men. On the morning they were to depart for Virginia City, Priscilla rose before dawn, excitement and nervousness making sleep impossible. She dressed in her least worn dress, a blue calico that had faded to a soft shade that complemented her eyes, and packed the few remaining items she'd need for the journey. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, she heard hoofbeats approaching, too many for just Xavier. Heart pounding, she grabbed Mrs. Hastings' shotgun and peered through the window. 5 riders approached, led by Sheriff Plummer himself. There was no time to run. They had already spotted smoke from her breakfast fire. Priscilla quickly checked that the shotgun was loaded, then stepped onto her small porch, the weapon held ready but not aimed. "Good morning, Sheriff," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're out early." Plummer reined in, his smile cold beneath his neatly trimmed mustache. "Miss Montgomery, I hope to catch you before you left for town." His gaze flickered to her packed bags visible through the open door. "Going somewhere? My personal travel plans are my own business, Sheriff." "Perhaps, but when those plans involve claim abandonment, they become my concern." He dismounted, his men following suit. "I've brought some papers for you to sign, a bill of sale for your property, very generous terms." "My claim isn't for sale," Priscilla replied firmly, "and I'm not abandoning it. I'm simply traveling for a few days." Plummer's facade of politeness slipped. "Miss Montgomery, let me be frank. This territory has no place for a woman trying to work a claim alone. It's dangerous, improper, and ultimately futile. The smart choice is to sell now, while you have the chance." "The smart choice is to mind your own business, Plummer," came Xavier's voice from behind the cabin. He emerged from the trees, rifle in hand, leading his horse. He must have approached from the back trail, Priscilla realized with relief. He positioned himself beside her on the porch, a clear statement of alliance. Plummer's eyes narrowed. "O'Malley, I thought we had an understanding." "We do," Xavier replied evenly. "I understand exactly what kind of man you are now." One of Plummer's men reached toward his gun, but the sheriff raised a hand to stop him. "This is a legal matter between Miss Montgomery and myself. You're interfering with official business." "There's nothing legal about threatening a woman to sell her rightful property," Xavier countered. "Any more than there's anything legal about your road agent activities." A dangerous silence fell. Plummer's men exchanged glances, hands hovering near their weapons. Priscilla felt cold fear wash through her, but she stood her ground beside Xavier. "That's a serious accusation," Plummer said finally, "one you couldn't possibly prove." "Maybe not alone," Xavier agreed, "but I'm not alone anymore. The Vigilance Committee had its first meeting last night. Quite a turnout, miners, merchants, even some of your own deputies who are tired of looking the other way." Uncertainty flashed across Plummer's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Xavier kept his rifle ready but relaxed. "You've pushed too far, Plummer. Robbery is one thing, murder is another. People are scared, and scared people stand together. Plummer studied them both, calculation evident in his eyes. Finally, he remounted his horse. "This isn't over, O'Malley." "For today it is," Xavier replied. "Miss Montgomery and I have business in Virginia City. When we return, we'll be legally wed and our claims combined. Any further discussion of selling will be between you and both of us." The announcement clearly surprised Plummer, though he recovered quickly. "Congratulations," he said with false sincerity. "A hasty wedding. How convenient." "Not as convenient as having the sheriff also running the road agents," Priscilla found the courage to add. "But we each make our choices, don't we?" Plummer's face darkened, but he merely tipped his hat. "Indeed we do, Miss Montgomery, indeed we do." He turned his horse. "Let's ride, boys." These lovebirds want privacy. They watched until the riders disappeared down the trail, neither moving until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then Xavier turned to Priscilla, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she lowered the shotgun. "That was bracing. You were magnificent," Xavier said, pulling her into his arms. "Brave and steady." "I was terrified," she admitted against his chest. "Do you think he'll be back? Not today. But yes, eventually." He drew back to look at her face. "The Vigilance Committee is real, though. It's been forming quietly for weeks. Plummer's days are numbered, but until then..." "Until then, we face him together," Priscilla finished. "As we planned." "As we planned," Xavier agreed, kissing her forehead. "Now let's get to Virginia City before Plummer decides to set up a roadblock." They rode hard that day, taking the less traveled trails and stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Virginia City, when they reached it that evening, proved larger and more established than Bannack, with proper streets and substantial buildings among the hastier structures of a boom town. They found lodging at a respectable hotel, separate rooms, though adjoining, and Xavier immediately set out to confirm the judge's schedule. He returned with good news. Judge Davis would be holding court the next day and could perform their marriage afterward. That night, alone in her hotel room, Priscilla wrote in her journal, recording the events that had brought her to this moment. From Boston society lady to frontier bride in less than 6 months, a transformation her younger self could never have imagined. Yet she felt more alive, more herself, than ever before. The wedding took place late the following afternoon after Judge Davis had concluded his court business. It was a simple ceremony in the judge's chambers, with only the hotel proprietor and his wife as witnesses. Priscilla wore her blue dress with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Xavier had somehow found a clean shirt and had his beard trimmed for the occasion. "Do you, Xavier James O'Malley, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the judge intoned. "I do," Xavier replied, his eyes never leaving Priscilla's face. "And do you, Priscilla Ann Montgomery, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she answered, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite the emotion swelling in her chest. "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Davis smiled kindly. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. O'Malley." Xavier drew her close, his kiss tender but thorough, making the hotel proprietor's wife sigh appreciatively. When they parted, Priscilla saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt that after so much wandering, they had both found home in each other. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, discovering each other with a mixture of passion and tenderness that left Priscilla breathless. Xavier's hands, so capable with tools and weapons, proved equally adept at giving pleasure, and she found her own boldness rising to match his. "I never thought I'd find this," Xavier murmured as they lay together afterward, her head on his chest, his fingers stroking through her unbound hair. Someone who sees me as I am and chooses me anyway. I never thought I'd become this person, Priscilla replied. Someone strong enough to build her own life instead of accepting the one assigned to her. You were always this strong, he said, tilting her face up to his. You just needed the chance to prove it. They returned to their claims the following day, alert for trouble but encountering none. At Xavier's suggestion, they decided to make his cabin their primary residence, as it was larger and better situated defensively, while maintaining Priscilla's property for her garden and potential future expansion. Summer faded into autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of the harsh Montana winter to come. Priscilla harvested her garden, preserving what she could for winter and selling the remainder in Bannack. Xavier hunted deer and elk, smoking meat and tanning hides for the cold months ahead. Together, they reinforced both cabins against winter storms, repaired tools and laid in firewood. Through it all, the shadow of Henry Plummer hung over them. The sheriff made no direct moves against them, but his men were often seen watching from a distance when they traveled to town. The Vigilance Committee continued to gather evidence against him, though proving the sheriff's connection to the road agents proved difficult. As October brought the first snow flurries, tensions in Bannack reached a breaking point. A stagecoach carrying gold from Virginia City was robbed, the driver and 2 passengers killed. One victim was the brother of a prominent merchant who had recently joined the Vigilance Committee. It's time, Xavier told Priscilla that night as they sat before their fire. The committee meets tomorrow night to vote on action against Plummer and his known associates. What will they do? Priscilla asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Xavier's expression was grim. What territorial justice has failed to do: judge them and if guilty, execute them. Without a trial, without a proper court. The proper court is corrupted, he reminded her gently. The law itself is the outlaw here. Priscilla shivered, not entirely from cold. Will you take part? He was silent for a long moment, then nodded. I have to. For us to be truly safe, for any honest person to be safe in this territory, Plummer's reign has to end. He took her hands in his. I won't ask you to approve, just to understand. I understand, she said softly, but please be careful. Plummer won't go quietly. The next day passed in tense anticipation. Xavier left for Bannack in the afternoon, promising to return by morning. Priscilla tried to occupy herself with mending and baking, but every sound made her start. Every shadow outside the window seemed threatening. When the sound of horses finally came well after midnight, she seized the shotgun before cautiously approaching the window. Relief washed through her at the sight of Xavier dismounting, though the grim set of his shoulders told her all she needed to know about the night's events. She opened the door before he could knock. It's done, Xavier nodded, his face haggard in the lamplight as he stepped inside. Plummer and 2 of his closest associates. He removed his coat, which smelled of smoke and the bitter cold. They confessed at the end, when the nooses were already around their necks. Named others. The committee will deal with them in the coming days. Priscilla helped him remove his boots, then guided him to the chair by the fire. She poured him a mug of hot coffee laced with whiskey and waited while he drank deeply. Was it necessary? She finally asked. Yes, he replied without hesitation. They'd killed at least 12 men that we know of, robbed countless others. Used the law to protect themselves while preying on honest citizens. He stared into the fire. It had to end. Priscilla knelt beside his chair, taking his hand in hers. Then you did what had to be done, and now it's over. Xavier's expression softened as he looked at her. Not over. But a new beginning, maybe. For this territory. For us. He pulled her onto his lap, holding her close as if reassuring himself that she was real, that they had survived. Priscilla pressed her face against his neck, inhaling his familiar scent beneath the cold and smoke, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her palm. "I love you," she whispered, words she'd felt for months but had never directly spoken. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Xavier's arms tightened around her. "I love you too," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I knew I could love anyone." They sat that way for a long time, holding each other as the fire burned low, and the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, the beginning of a new day in a territory where justice, however rough, had finally been served. Winter came in earnest that December, burying their cabin in snow and limiting their contact with Bannack to essential trips for supplies. With Plummer gone, a new sheriff had been appointed, a former miner named James Williams, who had helped organize the Vigilance Committee. Under his watch, the road agent activities ceased, and travelers moved more freely between the mining towns. Priscilla and Xavier settled into the rhythms of winter-long evenings reading by lamplight, days spent on indoor tasks, occasional visits from neighbors when weather permitted. In January, Priscilla confirmed what she'd begun to suspect: she was carrying their first child, due in late summer. "A baby," Xavier said in wonder when she told him, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" she asked, though his radiant expression already answered her question. "More than pleased," he replied, kissing her tenderly. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own, someone to leave a legacy to." As winter slowly yielded to spring, they began planning for the future. Xavier had been right about the territorial capital. It officially moved from Bannack to Virginia City in February 1865, increasing traffic between the two towns. With the road agents gone, commerce flourished, creating opportunity for their combined properties. "We could build a proper way station," Xavier suggested as they walked their land one April morning, the snow mostly melted except in shadowed hollows. "A place for travelers to rest, water their horses, maybe buy a meal." "With a larger garden," Priscilla added, her hand resting on her now visible pregnancy. "And perhaps a small mercantile for basic supplies." "Ambitious," Xavier grinned, pulling her close. "I like it." By the time their son was born in August, a healthy boy they named Frederick James O'Malley, after both their uncles, the foundations for their way station were already laid. Using lumber from their land and stone from the creek bed, Xavier and hired hands from Bannack constructed a substantial building with a common room, kitchen, sleeping quarters for travelers, and private rooms for their growing family. Priscilla's garden expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes that would take years to mature but promised future abundance. She continued her baking, now selling to travelers as well as in town, and began making preserves and jellies from wild berries gathered on their land. Their Creekside Station, as they named it, opened in the spring of 1866, strategically positioned to serve travelers on the increasingly busy route between Bannack and Virginia City. It quickly gained a reputation for clean rooms, good food, and fair prices. Within a year, they had added a small stable where fresh horses could be obtained, further increasing their business. As Montana Territory grew and developed, so did the O'Malley family and their enterprise. A daughter, Elizabeth Ann, joined them in 1867, followed by another son, Thomas, in 1870. Each child brought new joy to their lives, new purpose to their work. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Xavier surprised Priscilla by taking her to the canyon where they had first begun to see each other differently, where her dress had been torn by thorns, and he had offered his coat, looking away to preserve her dignity. "I wanted to bring you back here," he explained as they stood overlooking the steep ravine, now bright with spring wildflowers, to remember how it all began. With a frightened horse and a ruined dress, Priscilla laughed, leaning against his shoulder. With a woman too proud to be embarrassed by circumstance, Xavier corrected, turning her to face him. A woman who saw possibility where others saw hardship. And a man who looked beyond convention to see me as I truly was, she added softly. Not just a proper Boston lady, but someone capable of building a life out here. Xavier reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I never gave you a proper ring when we married. Our lives were too uncertain, our future too precarious. He opened the box to reveal a gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. This is from our land gold panned from the creek, refined in Virginia City. The diamond I had to purchase, but the setting is pure Montana. Tears welled in Priscilla's eyes as Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger beside her plain gold wedding band. It's beautiful, she whispered. Like you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. My strong, beautiful wife who took a chance on a rough miner with nothing but dreams. Dreams we built together, Priscilla corrected, reaching up to touch his face, now lined with a decade of Montana weather but still handsome to her eyes. And we'll continue building. Xavier kissed her then, with all the passion of their early days and the deeper, steadier love that had grown between them through years of shared labor, shared joy, and shared challenges. As they rode home to their thriving way station, where their children waited under the watchful eye of Mrs. Hastings, who had become like a grandmother to them after retiring from the hotel, Priscilla reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From Boston society to the Montana frontier, from jilted fiancé to beloved wife and mother, from inexperienced greenhorn to respected businesswoman, a transformation as vast as the Montana sky above them. And it had all begun with a torn dress, a borrowed coat, and a man who had looked away out of respect, but had ultimately seen her more clearly than anyone ever had before.